Many people interested in such an old book. So I'll be talking about the Old Testament book of Job. And I would be really glad if you interrupt me, if you have questions or inquiries, or perhaps even better if you have an idea that you want to maybe say out loud. The book of Job has always been troubling me. I've been fighting with the book for ever since I first read it, and I'm reading it over and over and over again. And I was always writing some notes on the side or in my cell phone. And then one day I realized that it was 120 pages of notes. So I thought that was an easy way how to write books. I don't like writing, so I sort of a little bit trick myself. I'm writing notes, and then it's only editing. So I get to skip the writing part. So why is an economist interested in the book of Job? Well, to me, the fundamental question of the book of Job is an essential one. It's the strongest book for me in the Bible, perhaps definitely in the Old Testament. And let me just briefly say the epic of the story. In the beginning, we hear that there's a party or some sort of a meeting in heaven, and God calls his sons, and devil appears to be one of them, and he comes and God starts the conversation, and he asks the devil, so what have you been up to, or what's up, or maybe perhaps what's down? And devil answers in a very unpolite way, not much, as if to end the conversation. And God asks the second time and says, did you notice my good friend Job? And how pious he is, how righteous and how good, and how much he loves me. Look how much he sacrifices to me every day. And the devil says, yeah, but he's not a good man. He's just a rational man. He's just a good economist. Look, he sacrifices one bull to you, and you give him, next day you give him 10. So that's reasonable and rational, and it's actually economical to be good, because goodness, you reward goodness. So people are not good because of goodness, but they're good because it gives them some profit or some utility. So it's fundamentally an economic book. And the question is, one of the questions is whether goodness pays, whether goodness is a good investment. And this is something that we are debating in, I teach economic ethics and economics, and it's one of the sort of underlying ideas that it's actually better for the company to be ethical, and this debate sort of falls into very many other areas. So God says, okay, let's test it. Do to him whatever you wish, just don't kill him. In other words, torture him as much as you want, but don't kill him. And the devil, of course, believes that this will make Job curse God and prove his point that he is, in fact, just a good economist, not a good, morally good man. And then the devil, on the first day, takes everything that he had, including his children, his possessions, his servants. He loses everything in sort of a moral super event of very highly suspicious explosion. In one day, all these bad things happen, and Job says, we have, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh, blessed be the name of the Lord. And so they have a second meeting. God has a second meeting with the devil and says, okay, so you see, I was right. And the devil says, yeah, but let's go a little bit further and let me torture him physically on his body. And God says, oh yeah, okay, fine. And so he does. He tortures him with some terrible pain. And Job is sitting, and basically he's scratching his skin with sharp clay because it hurts him. But he still says, his wife has a suggestion to him. He says, look at yourself, curse God and die, which sort of gives a negative image to the role of women in this story. But if you ever get to read Targum of Job, which is the same story only told in a different way, there are about 2 or 3 beautiful chapters about the wife, how she even lost her hair so that they would have something to eat, and that And it's a very touching story of how much his wife tried to ease his pain. And at the end of her attempt, she says, you know what, let's give it up. Let's curse God and let's die. So this was a suggestion that Job said, again, no. We should take good things and bad things with the same neutrality. So he says, whether the Lord gives me or takes, it doesn't change anything about my values. So another way how to look on the book of Job as an economist is to ask a fundamental question: what is the price of your values? How much pain or money, curses or blessings do I have to impose upon you so that you change your belief, i.e. yourself? So it's actually sort of a stoic position where I just play the game properly and I don't care whether I win or lose. I am here for the game itself. And then Job's friends come and they are in silence with him for 7 days and 7 nights. They sit in dust and weep. And after 7 days, one of them starts speaking, and but most of the book is actually a dialogue, or a conversation of these 4 people, and then eventually 5. And basically what the friends of Job are trying to say is modern Christian theology verbatim. You will find all the arguments that you use or that Christians use exactly put in the mouth of these friends, whom we later learn that they have not spoken well of God, and that Job has to, at the end of the story, he has to sacrifice at their for them. So it's a very disturbing book. And at the end of this conversation, which is going sort of in circles, unlike a Platonic dialogue, there is no development. A Platonic dialogue starts at point 0 and it has a conclusion, and you can't really read them from the middle because the arguments build upon each other. This is not the case here. Here you can actually even skip it. The whole story, and you can read it from the middle. They're turning in circles. None of them changes a position. In Platonic discourse, or dialogues, if you can call it dialogues, because the other party usually does. Yes, it is so, dear Socrates. It appears that you are right, dear Socrates. So very often the dialogue is just there to sort of make the text more readable. But the opponent of Socrates changes their opinion as not so in the book of Job. The debate is not epic, let's say. It's very lyrical. There is no movement, so to speak. But what's much more interesting is God joins this debate at the end of the book, and he has the longest monologue in the history, actually the longest monologue in the whole Bible. In the New Testament, he almost doesn't speak at all, God. He only says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I have found much liking," and that's pretty much it. So we can see that God speaks very much, but if you read the Bible chronologically, he, as a divinity, speaks less and less. So this is the biggest monologue that we have of the Jewish Christian God. To my knowledge, and I would be really happy if somebody would correct me or guide me, I think it's the biggest monologue in any religion. Gods of all religion and beliefs usually speak, they're usually very silent, and if they speak briefly, and usually it's sort of one-on-one. So this is the biggest display of God's thinking, if you wish. Not only in Christianity, but in all other religions known to me, there is never this long monologue of direct speech of divinity. And towards the end of the book, Job's possessions are restored. They are actually doubled, multiplied, and I will come to what God answers. God basically says exactly what Job asks him not to. Job very kindly, in 38 chapters, repeats the same thing. Basically says, I am innocent, I haven't done anything else wrong. This is fundamentally unfair. And his friends are telling him, no, you must have sinned. And of course, we are all taking the position of Job, and we think that these friends are pretty much idiots. But if Job didn't sin, Christianity is wrong. This is not an easy task. It's not just, these friends are idiots. If it's true that Job didn't sin, then Paul is wrong when he says that everybody has sinned and we're all fallen short of the mercy and we all need Christ because it's impossible to get to heaven on your own effort. Well, Job did it. It's in the Bible. It's in your holy book. So it's a deep question even till today. Even you or even as a believer in Christianity, it would be very difficult for you to admit that salvation is possible without Christ. So let's not judge these friends very sternly, because these friends are in fact us. Our opinion is reflected by the nuances of his friends. Now, it's a very curious book. It's mind-blowing. Every theologian who wrote anything was trying to fight with this book. So let's start. Now I introduced sort of what happened, and let's now try and dig into it. First of all, the story starts as a divine bet, sort of. But it never, you would expect at the end for this storyline to finish and maybe have a next meeting between God and the devil, and the God said, you see, I won, you owe me 2 bottles of champagne, or you'll burn in hell forever and ever. I won the bet. But this completely disappears and sort of goes into thin air. So point number 1. Point number 2, and this is a little bit brutal, so please excuse me. Job stands the test. The question is whether the relationship between divinity and man is about rewards of physical nature. Job is able to stand strong and prove that his relationship to God is not about material things. God fails miserably because it is him who rewards Job twice as much with the possession. So he fully says, yeah, my relation, I can pay him for pain. It's like if you come home and your father beats you up and then next day he buys you a car. What sort of a father is this? And doesn't apologize. This is important. There's not even a hint of apology in God's answer. What's even more striking is that God seems to be angry at Job for some reason that's quite hard to understand. And Job constantly says, please, Job doesn't even want his pain to end. This is quite interesting. He only wants ideology. He wants to understand why is this happening. He wants to have ideology, let's say, of pain. And he repeats this many, many times. Oh God, please talk to me and explain it to me. Don't talk to me from a position of power. I fully acknowledge that you're the big guy and I'm the small guy. He repeats this over and over to the point of being tired by the text. And he always says, I respect you, you're the big guy, but could you please answer me like a man? Could you just answer me like an equal? I know we're not equal, but please, why is this happening to me? Paradox number 3 is that every small child could explain it to Job. Well, sorry, it was a bet, The devil came to me and he was trying to challenge me, so I bet. I'm sorry, I apologize, I give you double. That would be enough. I couldn't tell you before because clearly you must have had this. If you knew that it was a test, it would not have worked. Why didn't he say that? It would be easy for us and Hebrews and everybody who's read the book, and it would be the case. But God refuses fundamentally to say even that, and he scolds Job for asking questions. And he answers him precisely from a position of power. So, God says, and who you shouldn't swear in the church, right? So, who are you? Where were you when I was creating the stars? Do you know where the gazelles are born? Do you know how light travels? Do you know how I form the stars? And then, for 2 pages, he talks about this behemoth and leviathan that we don't really know until today what. So, Job is asking theological, ethical, philosophical questions, and God talks National Geographic, basically. We have this, many people have this image that when we die, we get to ask the question and some big guy will give us the answer, right? That's sort of a fantasy that many people even ask, what would you ask if you could ask? So let me assure you, the answer you're gonna get is gonna be like the one that Job got. So, dear God, now that we are talking face to face, can you please explain why my mother died at childbirth? Oh, did you see the snake? Look, that's really cool color. And why do innocent people die like small children? Oh, do you know how bears mate? And do you know that there are 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the universe? Yeah, but I was interested. Oh, and look at the gazelles. And then I will talk about behemoth, which you don't even have a clue what it is. He spends half of his speech, this is like primetime God, explaining himself to mankind, and he has something to explain. But instead, he really does Discovery Channel. And next irony is that the questions, and I really love this part, is that God asks questions. Who could answer these questions? A theologian? A philosopher? A moral teacher? No, a scientist could very easily answer all of those questions except for the behemoth and leviathan. So do you know how stars are born? Yes, we do. We've seen just collide 2 neutron stars last week, and we have a gravitational wave picture of it. We even hear the sound. It was visible in the electromagnetic spectrum, and we measured it with our new gravitational detector called LIGO. And we can even hear it, the sound. So yeah, we do have a good idea how stars are born. If the mass is 10 times that of our sun, they implode into a red dwarf, and then it implodes into a neutrino star, and then if there is enough mass, it goes into a black hole, and black holes are really cool. So yeah, do you know where the gazelles are born? Yes, we do. We know that. Actually, that wasn't that difficult. Took us 2-3 days of living in the jungle and taking pictures. So yeah, they're born in their caves. Do you know? Yeah, and these questions are scientific questions. So science, if anything, is answering questions that God is interested in. God is not interested, from the book of Job, God is not interested in philosophy, nor is he interested in theology, and least of all, justice and righteousness and these things that we think that belong to church. God doesn't even mention them. So if you are interested about the topics that God is interested in, study science. You have the highest probability that when you have a conversation with him, he will enjoy it. So that's, to me, the non-existing gap between faith and science. Now, all these things are set in a way as to answer a fundamental question. So this would be a point number 7. For the ancients, the dilemma wasn't a modern one, whether God exists or not, whether you are a believer or a non-believer. But the question was whether this God, or this divine principle, if you want to, the rules of physics, let's put it this way, whether they are good, evil, or indifferent. This was the question that the Old Testament human being was asking. Is God good or is he evil? That's how we should read the book of Job. And the friends of Job say God is always right. This was, of course, a debate that pretty much maybe the same time in Greece. Also, Socrates has this debate whether gods are above or below morality laws. Whether there are some laws that apply to divinity, or whether whatever divinity does is by definition good. So, yeah, this is clear. And to me, this is the same question that they are asking in the book of Job. So it's a very fundamental, beautiful book with many facets to it. Where to go to? Okay, so let's for example focus on this. Wait, let me see. This struggle that Job, yes, that's what I wanted to say. At the end, God is not only angry at Job, but he's also angry at his friends, at Job's friends. And he says, you have to sacrifice for them. I am angry at them. I need to forgive them. This is the reason of sacrifice. Because they didn't speak well of me. What do you mean they didn't speak well of you? They tried bending the logic to the barest point just to make you look better than you are. Yes, they didn't speak well of me. I'm not that good guy. They spoke better of me than I am. I am not that. Job's friends are also a little bit reminding me of us. When somebody comes with a good question, like Job, they give plastic, stupid answers that they themselves don't truly believe. So God is mad at his friends, and Job, because he speaks critically of God, wins his approval of some sort. So this is also another, and I really liked your comment on the translation that this behemoth was a symbol of evil creature. And he says, I've created that. I've created an evil creature. And in other parts in the Old Testament, it very frequently says, I do good things and I do bad things. It is up to me. I am above my own rules, which is something that happens fundamentally in Christianity. Of course, we know that Jesus didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. But things change. God is actually canceling some of the things that he was very meticulous about. For example, not eating pigs. For some reason, that was not a good idea. And then in the New Testament, it was fine. Suddenly, you don't have to be circumcised. Suddenly, all these laws that he was very, 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 very specific about are changing. So this is not the first time that God is sort of testing his own limits. So my reading of the book of Job is that God is trying to freely walk around his rules in a negative way. I can be mean, I can do whatever I wish, and I don't have to explain to nobody. In Christianity, if you not only believe in the Old Testament, but also or Tanakh, but also in the New Testament, he does the same thing, only from opposite. He is unfair, but positively unfair. So I always say, when you lose 1,000 euros, you always say, oh, that's unfair. When you find 1,000 euros, you don't say that it's unfair. But it's the same unfairness, only the first unfairness was negative, and the second unfairness was positive. This is something I think Jesus meant. It's difficult to say, but this is how I read this very economic parable from the New Testament about the workers in the vineyard. The only people who got a just wage were the ones who worked the whole day. They got what they were promised. So they were the only ones who were treated justly, and they are the ones that are complaining that it wasn't just. It should have been the people who only worked for 1 hour and got the same wage like working for. It was unfair to them, but positively unfair. So people complain when something is unfair negatively, but never complain that something is unfair positively. And this, to me, is the fast way of explaining Christianity. God is unjust. Thank God. The whole message of New Testament is that God is not just, that he's positively unjust. He is unjust at his own cost towards our advantage. In Job, exact opposite happens. The relationship that God, or whenever somebody is trying to become a Christian, I tell them, you know what, read the book of Job so that you know with what entity you are dealing here with. Yeah, don't read the fluffy 2-3 chapters in the New Testament. Read the book of Job. That's the divinity that you're worshiping and serving, and etc., etc. Now, to be a little bit positive and not to be so negative, and again, my only hope is that this book is inviting us to be critical, that this book doesn't ask us to try to paint God, but every theologian that I have read who has a deconstruction about the book of Job is trying to make God look better. I really don't know why. Is there some extra points for that? Or you know, if I be a divinity, I would like to have a proper picture of myself. I don't need the CV version of my life, which only mentions the nice things. Also, when people introduce me, they always only say the nice things, which is very nice, but they never say bad things when they intro you. So, from the positive side, how to now read this. Also, this is the first, to my knowledge, this is something that Slavoj Žižek came up with. This is not my idea, although I think it's a brilliant one, that it is the first self-critique of ideology, in this case, religion. The book of Job is the first critical book of its own beliefs. It invites you to be critical. It is in a way, European heritage to be critical. Our thinking has always been critical. That's how we move forward. René Descartes could invent science because he was critical towards everything that he heard, knew, and he was trying to doubt. And every other philosopher that was born starts criticizing his father, like we've seen with Aristotle and Plato and others. So what is the message for us? Because again, if I compare it with Platonic, yeah, I put that glass of bottle in a very bad position. I should have taken it with me because I really love, Netherlands has always been a refuge for Czech intellectuals in Reformation period. They ran here and many of them are buried here. Comenius, for example, I don't know whether he is known here, is he? Comenius, yeah, so that's our common project that we have. He was also critical, Luther was also critical. Whatever happened, this is, for example, when you compare it to Chinese tradition, they don't have so much criticism. If you read Chinese philosophers, they are not critical. It's not this sort of European critical way of thinking, of doubting everything. And it started with the book of Job. Uncurable infection on Christianity. If the book of Job wouldn't have been there, I would be burned, I think, 4 times a day by some volunteer. So now, let me go to another part of the Old Testament, if I may. And I'm going to now say a fundamental thesis which I sort of read in the story when Jacob is renamed to Israel. Now, it's a very curious story. I think it's a story you know, but for those of you who don't know, Jacob means trickster. Jacob means pulling by the heel, which is like you're pulling my leg. We would say today, Hebrews say you're pulling, in Czech we say you're pulling my nose. What do you pull when do you pull something when you make fun of people? Nose. So that's why the Czech intellectuals came here. So yeah, pulling my nose. So he was pulling heel, and all his life was basically trickstery, which is quite interesting for those of you who study anthropology or psychology. The archetype of a trickster can be beautifully seen exactly in the case of Jacob. Anyway, he's returning home after he got tricked by somebody else. And over some river, whose name I don't remember, Jabbok? Yeah, Jabbok. In the middle of the night, some entity comes and fights with him. It looks like an angel. We don't know if it's a devil or an angel. And it's funny because it's a physical fight because he then limps on his one leg. So it must have been a physical fight. And there are also 1,000 ways how this story is interpreted, and each one of them is quite interesting. But I don't think anybody noticed a basic, and again, please correct me, I'm not a professional theologian, nobody noticed that there is a huge ambiguity in the renaming, because Israel means fights with God. And it is unclear in all languages known to me whether it means fighting with God, as in against, or fighting with God against something else. I think in Dutch it's same. No? It's not clear how this fight is structured, and it's fundamental, no? Whether you're fighting with somebody or alongside with somebody. So the one who fights with God, what does it mean? Which one is it? Am I fighting with God or am I fighting with God? And as things are, after a couple of months of thinking over this and losing sleep, I came with a stupid, obvious solution that it's both at the same time. Whenever you're fighting with God and vice versa. That to me is belief. I am fighting with the Christian God, that's what makes me Christian. If I'd be fighting with Quran, I'd be Muslim. But my dealings, my thought, my edge of belief is a Christian image of God. So what does this mean? Well, in one way, it means something fundamental. For example, if I may now go to the New Testament, the Lord's Prayer, again, as an economist, reading the Lord's Prayer is also quite interesting, because it says, "Give us today our daily bread." And I have to immediately ask, okay, so whose bread is it? What do you mean, give us our bread? If it's ours, then you give us your bread would make sense. But not give me my bread. I mean, to an economist, and I don't know what this would do to a lawyer, but to an economist, it sort of, and we've heard it and prayed it so many times, we don't even realize how drastic this is. And this is also true of other things that Jesus says. He says, the last will be first, and we all say that the last will be first. But he's saying up is down, black is white, past is tomorrow, last will be first. You rather go to look for one sheep than the 99 other sheeps. So what sort of a transaction, what sort of a gift is it? Give us our bread. And this took me much longer to wrap my head around, and the best thing that I came up with is that this is on par with "May your will be done." Our will is that your will be. It's a little bit, so God, in form of Jesus, asked us to pray that His will would happen. Why does He need our will? Why doesn't He just do it? Why is it like a cheering support? Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. I mean, why? I think what's going on here, in the same way that we ask God for our bread, He asks us for His will. I always ask myself, what would have to happen that God's will wouldn't take place? What sort of how is reality structured? Can God wants us to pray that He's not mean to us? Please don't be mean. Please don't be yourself sometimes. Or please be the better of you. That also slightly makes sense. So what's happening here is a sort of an interlocking. We don't even know whether the bread is ours or not. Even though it is ours, we have to pray for it. This is what He asked us. And the same weird, not exact ownership structure is happening with this sort of a will exchange. Our will is that you do what you want to do. It's a strange construction. Are we here to fight with God? So let me go to one other place in the New Testament. No, let me start from the book of Genesis. Creation. So usually the theology is usually like this. In the beginning, God created everything great. Then we came, screwed it up, and He had to remedy it. Basically, that's Christianity in 30 seconds. I have left out a couple of the more juicy parts, but this is basically, if you force me, this would be like the gist of it. But let's pause and let's have a look on the paradise, because as an economist, I'm trying to look how human beings would behave let's put it this way. If people would be happy, if their context would be perfect. So this never happened in history, so I had to look into fictional spaces. So I started with The Lord of the Rings from Tolkien. So were the elves happy in Rivendell? No. They kept wanting to go west, which is something for me, from the former Eastern Bloc, very much understandable. But I didn't know that elves were as unhappy in paradise of Rivendell as we were unhappy in the Mordor of communism, or what it was. This book was, by the way, banned in communist countries because the censor thought, for some strange reason, that Mordor is a description of the Soviet Union. So this book was, you had to only read it secretly. So then, where else can we look for a description of paradise, long-lasting description of paradise? Lord of the Rings, Matrix. Remember, there's this scene when Morpheus is tortured psychologically by Agent Smith. And Agent Smith says, you know what? The first Matrix, for those of you who haven't seen it, but I hope everybody has. Matrix was an illusionary virtual reality created for sleeping people, and these sleeping people were a source of energy for the artificial intelligence. So we became slave of we created machines to be our slaves. Subject-object reversal that I talk a lot about, but not today. This happens very often, that the master-slave relationship is swapped. This also happens in Christianity, that the master-slave relationship is swapped. And why am I saying that? And Smith says the first matrix, the first illusion that we created for you was a happy one. But you couldn't take it. He says we lost an entire harvest because people couldn't take long-term paradise. And eventually, of course, I got to Genesis, because that's a wonderful and quite unique description of how things looked ideally, freshly created by divinity, still in the warranty, so to speak, still fresh. So I zoomed in on how Adam felt in the paradise. So he had perfect health. He had everything he needed. He had a nice gardening job. He had animals around him. There was only one woman on the planet. Just imagine how many things simplified. Only one potential partner. He was talking with God like I'm talking with you. They were probably playing ping pong. And everything was, he must have been super smart. His body must have been beautiful. He was perfect. And the surrounding areas, the context was also perfect. Now, what is the emotion that we hear that Adam has? We don't hear about any joy. We hear that Adam is not bored, maybe bored later, but that's an interpretation. But it says really in the Bible, Genesis, I don't know what, chapter 3. I was going to church when I was younger, so I was always impressed how they quote the chapters. So what did Adam feel? Alone. That's the only feeling that we know. He maybe was born, maybe he was happy, but that's speculation. The only thing that we know that he was alone. That's not a happy state. A. B. If, and this is a big if the reason why God created mankind was for a relationship, which it doesn't say in the Bible, but it's quite often believed by today's Christianity, then creation of a man was a total disaster. Just imagine that you as a couple, one of you in the couple would feel alone. That's terrible. So I've created you to be my friend or partner or something, and you feel alone with me. You're talking with me, you're playing ping pong, but you're sad because you're alone. So that's something's not right, even in the paradise, weeks before we touched the whole tree. So God created paradise and a man in it, and that man was not very happy. Paradox number one. It gets better. Paradox number two, God says, it is not good for man to be alone. I'll give him an assistant. I'll give him a suitable helper. Helper? So Adam must have immediately felt, I need help? With what? Am I not doing something right? Am I not keeping the garden? In what direction do I need help? So the second feeling Adam must have had was that of impotence. I don't know what my role is, but I'm not doing it well. And clearly and here I also take a little bit different approach than most theologians, and I skip the sex part. In other words, another human being was created. We have much more in common than we have differences. So whether it was a male or female doesn't really matter, but God created him an extra helper, a suitable helper, but mainly a helper. So as an economist, I can say that the first state of mankind wasn't that of unemployment, but overemployment. He simply didn't fulfill his task well enough. Now, this brings us to a wonderful question. What was the task of Adam? We don't know. We don't know why God created Adam, but we do know why he created the other being called Eve, to help with something. So my speculation is that Adam's role was also to help God with something. Because clearly, you could argue that line. So that's three bad things that happened in paradise in a perfect God-created situation, as I said, weeks before we even touched the tree. And again, the reason why I'm asking this question is to see whether human beings are technically or hypothetically or even on the level of fantasy, if we can even fantasize a long-lasting paradise in which human beings would be happy. And the question is, and the answer that I get from Tolkien, from Wachowski brothers, and the author of the Bible is absolutely no. Happiness is not a state in which mankind can last for more than a couple of seconds. And I didn't have, well, actually, why not? This is why there is so much ambiguity between, I think, sex and religion, because for that one small little second you forget about time and space and you are happy. And then the reality comes back. So let's go to Star Wars. Can you imagine that you would have 7 continuations of something that would be called Star Piece? And the first Star Piece is Luke is very happy. Second part is Leia is also very happy. And the third part is even Han Solo is very happy. And next year you're gonna see how Darth Vader can be also very happy. It would not get 7 sequels if it would be Star Piece. We can't even structure stories in it. So now I come to, and also maybe one reason why they took the fruit is that they said maybe to themselves, is this it? Is this all there is to reality? I want to complicate it. Do you know why complicated people have complicated lives, by the way? Because we want it that way. You could be sitting home watching some stupid, channel. I wanted to say sports channel, but I said channel. Isn't it intriguing how people are interested in completely uninteresting things such as sport results? I'm not talking about active sport. There, no problem. But so much money, and you can only have 2 outcomes. Either one or the other team wins, or it's a draw. That's pretty much all the options you have. And for thousands of years, it's either this party wins, or that party wins, or it's a draw. And we're still excited, and we can't wait to see which one's winning. What is the fun in that? Why don't we follow science, where literally every day something completely new happens? Yesterday, form of artificial intelligence called Sophia, created by Hanson Robotics, maybe you know, received citizenship. That just happened yesterday. Sometimes I can't wait to wake up in the morning and read the science news. The same goes about the economy. Why are we so interested whether it goes up or down? I've been doing it for 20 years until today. It either goes up or it goes down or it's flat. And it's over and 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 over. And instead of really being interested in interesting things, we are interested in boring things. Which brings me to my fundamental question. How would a human being behave if he stayed in the paradise? As probably God wanted. This is what we believe. We believe that God wanted us to stay in the paradise and not to touch the fruit. We don't know how a human being would behave if he would be living in a perfect context for a long period of time. But I think there is a small little hint, if you allow me, in the New Testament story of the prodigal son. Because there we have a small suggestion of how people feel when they don't leave the father, which is the older brother. So this is a little bit, I think, liberal interpretation of the parable, but bear with me, I think it has a chance of making a little bit of sense. Okay, so what's happening here, it's a little bit similar like the garden situation, yeah? So this father has two sons. This is a parable that Jesus tells to his disciples. Father has two sons. The younger, I think he was younger, let's call him the younger son, the prodigal son, says, you know, Dad, give me your money, pay me the heritage. I want to leave the paradise of your protection. And the father says, yes, go, here's your money. This guy goes away, squanders it with alcohol, drugs, and prostitutes, and is then, a little bit later, feeding the pigs. Pig is a filthy animal, as we know from Pulp Fiction. And he's feeding the pigs, and he's not allowed even to eat the filth that he gives to the pigs. And then comes an interesting sentence. Then it says, and he came to himself in the mud of economic crisis. Yeah, this was an economic. It's also interesting that this prodigal son returned to the father, not because he had an epiphany like Paul, or because he had a dream, or because he had a sudden realization that his father actually deserved better, or whatever. No, it was an economic crisis that made him realize something and come to himself. Now, let's pause with this come to oneself. What does that mean? Who comes to who? How can you not come to yourself? And what sort of a gap is it between me and me that I need such economic crises almost dead so that these two collide again? It's like this hadron accelerator that we have in CERN. So much energy so that these two protons collide. He needed an extreme energy of the financial crisis for him to return to the Father. By the way, do you know what's the most popular destination in the Bible? Direction in the Bible? It's not forward, it's back. That is the most preferred direction. And you see this come back to me, but back to Israel, back that it's God wants us, if anything, to go back, to return. Not so much to go forward. So the children of Israel didn't go forward to the promised land, they returned to the promised land. That's the rhetorics of Genesis. So, he came to himself and came back to the Father. Okay, and now we look at the older son. And here, again, I think it's a little liberal interpretation, but I think it gives us a hint of how people would look like if they stayed in the Garden of Eden, in paradise. So the proper question I think I was asking, the proper question here to ask then would be, the older brother, was he himself? Because the younger brother clearly somehow oneself went away from self. I really don't know how that is possible technically, but he was not himself. We also say this Very often in our daily conversations, this is not you. Huh? We say this to children. This is not you, or I'm not. It wasn't me. This is what we say when we ask people for forgiveness. It wasn't me. It was alcohol, or I was tired, or I was angry. It wasn't really me. It was not myself. How is it technically possible that you are not you? I leave for someone else. But let's try to see whether the older brother was himself. And there are about 4 hints that not at all. First of all, this brother is mad when his brother comes back because it was unjust. Positively unjust, again, from the father to receive him back. He shouldn't have done that. So he cannot rejoice in his brother coming back, which is, let's say, understandable. What's not understandable is that he cannot rejoice in the joy of his father. Because if he so loved him, which I doubt, but actually didn't love him at all, because if I am not happy with my brother coming back, but if my father is happy that his son came back, I will rejoice with you in your joy because you're my father. And he doesn't do that. He resents the father. Third, we know that he wasn't himself because he could never make a party for his friends. He wanted to clearly make a party. And sorry, for those of you who don't know the parable, this older son comes to the father and says, why? I've been serving you, I've been here, I've been good, I've been doing all your wishes, I've been doing all your commandments, you told me not to leave you, I didn't leave you, he did. And now look, he's come back and you killed cows and you're having a huge party as a celebration for his comeback. I never had a single party. So he wasn't himself. Third sign that he wasn't himself. And the father said, well, if you just was yourself, if you just said it, I would have made 10,000 parties for you, but you never said that. So my daring interpretation of this parable and the book of Job is that, in fact, the only way how you can be yourself is to leave the paradise. So that also, I think, a little bit sheds somewhat positive light to the dismal book of Job, in which God is fighting his own rules with himself, being helped by people. Let me read, how much time do we have? If there is a little time for the debate, I would be maybe happy, huh? How much? 20 minutes left. Okay, so let me just read one last thing here, and then I would be very, very happy for some sort of reflection of my thoughts. Because the problem with my discipline is that you can very easily go astray. We don't have scientific labs to test your opinions, so you are the only correcting mechanism that I have, and this is in fact, of course, why I am here. This is something... No, let's end here and let's go directly to the debate. Okay, so thank you very much for allowing me to be as monologish as God, and now, thank you. Thank you. Questions? You speak Hebrew? How is it in Hebrew, this fighting with God? Is it also ambivalent? Israel. Is it also ambiguous, as in fighting with or against is not clear?
I don't think so.
That it's not ambiguous?
What the Hebrew is saying is he's the fighter of God, God's fighter. God owns him, and so he's at the side of God. I think the Hebrew implies that.
If you could look at it, I don't speak Hebrew, so I can only use the languages which are known to me, of course. Okay. What do you think? Nonsense?
No. I think there's a comment of a Berlin rabbi who states that the question in Genesis is actually to leave paradise. It's good to leave paradise. And it's good that there's an angel to prohibit coming back to paradise with flaming swords. Leave paradise. You have to eat your bread with pain and have your children with pain, and that's how mankind is. In paradise, people immediately began dreaming to be gods or something like that. Leave paradise; it's much better.
Yeah. And also, this is my interpretation of the book of Job. Well, not even my. From the book of Job, we know that God plays sort of tricks on us. Yes? He doesn't. He puts us to a test, and he doesn't say that it's a test. So this situation in the Garden of Paradise could have also been scheduled in a way. He couldn't have said, "Rebel against me," because that wouldn't have worked. It's like a father. It's so like when we call him our father, we usually think of us as small children. But I have a father and I'm adult, and I think my relationship with God is a little bit similar to an adult person's relationship to his father or her. No questions? Yes, please. Or comments?
Well, actually, I'm curious what your ideas have for what the implications are for the future paradise. If you think, what would you think about that?
Yeah, okay, so this one is how to put it. I'm very much interested in modern development of technology, especially artificial intelligence and the like. And I have a sort of a little feeling that, okay, this is going to sound really crazy, but why not? I am connecting Jesus' prophecies, or any prophecies, be it Muhammad or Moses or John, with digital possibilities of mankind in the future. One of the most daring theses that I have is that the biological form of existence is just one step in human evolution, and that in the next step we will leave we will leave this earth, and we will build new heaven on the internet. So sometimes when they ask Jesus about, the Pharisees the Sadducees, who didn't believe in afterlife, came to Jesus and they gave him a paradox. There is a wife who has a husband dies, marries another one, also dies, 6 husbands like that before somebody gets the problem. And then, who is she going to be married in heaven? And Jesus goes, you're not going to have a body, or bodies will be optional, which is exactly what happens in virtual reality. There you will be God, and you can be a male, female. We don't reproduce physically, we copy paste. Which is also my answer to why Adam was alone. This is a little bit rather a joke, a theological joke, if such jokes are even possible. And so God is alone, and he creates somebody to help his loneliness. But he forgot that when he made copy-paste of himself, he also copied the loneliness. So yeah, rather a joke, but so I think that in the future, it's actually interesting to combine things that are usually not combined, such as digital possibilities and religious prophecies because do you have an alarm clock? Like a physical one? Can you show me where you have your alarm clock? There you go. Okay, so it's in your introduction screen. Right. That's where he has his alarm. He doesn't have, and it's not his, and it's not an alarm. So the body of the alarm is dead. We don't use it anymore. So what is it that you have in your iPhone? Well, Plato would say that it's the alarmness. I think Plato would call it, Aristotle would say that it's the telos, the purpose of the alarm. A computer program would say that it's the program or algorithm of the alarm. But I could also say that it's the spirit of the alarm. So like the old gospel song, we could also sing this about an alarm clock. Alarm clock is dead, but his spirit marches on. The spirit of the alarm clock is better off. This alarm that you have in your phone is much better to remember They like kilo, there were 2 bells and a small little hammer going in there. That's an alarm with a body. In a nutshell, I think this is what will happen to mankind. We will evaporate into a dream-like situation where there will be history and adventure and evil. We will have probably like some sort of adventures, but they won't be really dangerous. It would be like living in some sort of a fantasy. So also, one interesting way for young people to read the book of Genesis is that God is attempting to create artificial intelligence. Because to divinity, that's exactly what we are. We are artificial intelligence. And the worries that he has with it are the same worries that we have today. I wrote a big paper and I presented it at Yale School of Divinity a couple of months ago, where I am thinking that I'm using a little bit of what I said about Job, that God created us not really for relationship, but to help him with something. And I think that's what we are here to do. We are supposed to help God with creating this new heaven. Maybe we are forerunners to a digital body form, who knows? But it's fun reading because, let me just give you a shortened version of that. Today, when you want to create artificial intelligence, Elon Musk and others are urging to be very careful about that because it's a demon, da-di-da, you've all heard that 10,000 times. But what he adds is that we should create this artificial intelligence in a air-gapped laboratory, meaning that even electricity shouldn't be going there. We should, so that if it gets awake, so that it cannot escape. A little bit like the Garden of Eden. And also, Mark, that we would give him 2 tasks. First task would be order something. Order my pictures from a holiday in a way that I would enjoy. So don't order them according to the color, but according to places, for example. So we want the artificial intelligence to have intuitive intelligence like us. So that was the task number 1. And the task number 2 that we would give to a new form of artificial intelligence would be, don't touch the red button. These 2 tasks we will give to artificial intelligence. First one is testing the capability of that new entity, its intelligence. In this, we as mankind did wonderfully. God, who complains pretty much about everything, doesn't complain when Adam sorts the animals. So he does extremely good job and a powerful, so Adam as a new form of artificial intelligence is a powerful entity, but mischievous. So what would you do if you created an artificial intelligence that has a possibility of killing you? Again, there is a glitch image in Christianity, but is disobedient. What would you do? Well, destroy it. Delete it, start somewhere else, or do something else for fun. But I think what happened to God, he fell in love with us, against his will. And that's maybe what will happen to us also. We'll create artificial intelligence. Will it be our product or will it be our child? Product, if you don't like, you can destroy. A child, if you don't like, you shouldn't destroy. Yes, 5 minutes, yeah. So if you're interested, I'd be very happy to send you, because we are running out of time. And my suggestion of why God created us was to create on. Through science, through research. And one last thing, as an economist, I split the world into micro and macro. Yeah, this is quite natural. So I also look at the miracles in terms of macro miracles and micro miracles. Now, Jesus performed many, many micro miracles. But he didn't perform, except for salvation, he didn't perform any macro miracle. So specifically, he fed the hungry, but he didn't deal with hunger as such. He healed lepers, but he didn't heal leprosy. We, scientists, healed leprosy. So I'm always saying that Superman, by the way, also notice they make micro miracles. So I don't know, a bus full of small children is falling off a cliff. Superman, which is also funny, he cannot function if he's not dressed as a Superman. I was always wondering why does he waste time? The bus is falling down and he goes to change. Yeah. So anyway, so Superman comes and saves these 20 children, puts them back on the road. That's a micro miracle. If Superman would be a real gentleman and a real person who actually cares for the lives of small children, he should sit in some steering committee on how to make roads safer. He should be a bureaucrat or a scientist if he really wanted to improve something around him. So we are making macro miracles. Jesus sort of showed us, yeah, okay, it's good to heal lepers. And we, a couple of centuries later, dealt with leprosy on large. We dealt with hunger. In the year 1820, 96% of the population lived in absolute poverty. Pretty much everybody except the kings and their surroundings were worried that the next day they won't have anything to eat. Today, you know how much it is? 9.4. 9.4% of inhabitants of Earth live under $1.50 a day. Still not zero, but we're working on it.